Have you ever experienced a moment in your life where everything is falling apart and you're searching for God, you're crying out to Him, but all you can hear is silence? What if I told you that God is actually speaking, but the noise around you is drowning Him out? In this episode, we are breaking down the story of Elijah to uncover how to recognize God's voice even when life feels chaotic. In episode 186, we discussed the story of Elijah. And while we were reading that, there was something that stood out to me that I want to talk about today. And if you want to follow along, go to 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 11 through 13. But before we read, I do want to give you a little backstory so that you understand what is happening in this chapter. So this is when Elijah had performed a miracle to prove to the children of Israel that God is God and all of the prophets that they have been following are false prophets. After he performed his miracle, all of the prophets were killed, and Jezebel was very upset about it, and he wanted to kill Elijah because of this. So Elijah had ran away. He was afraid. God had sent an angel to strengthen him, and he went on a 40-day and 40-night journey. In verses 11 through 13, this is where God came to speak to Elijah. So it says, "Then he said, 'Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord.' And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. So it was, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly, a voice came to him and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" So let's stop there. The Lord told Elijah to go stand on the top of the mountain before the Lord. After he told him that, the wind came, an earthquake came, and a fire came. And it said that the Lord was not in it. Finally, after all of that passed, a small, gentle whisper came, and then Elijah finally went and he stood on the top of the mountain. So as this wind, fire, and earthquake passed, I don't know if you noticed, but Elijah did not go out and stand on the top of the mountain, nor did he try to respond to it. It was only when he heard the sound of a whisper that he went out and he did what God told him to do. I want you to understand that a wind and a fire are storms. If you look up the definition of a storm, it says that a storm is a violent disturbance of the atmosphere. So before Elijah heard God's voice, he first heard the chaos of a storm. Yet he still made the decision to respond only when he heard God. Where am I getting at with this? My question to you is, what do you respond to? Do you respond to the storm, or do you respond to God? I have been in so many situations in my life where I was going through a storm. It felt like my whole world was getting turned upside down. It felt like my life was falling apart. I was crying out to God. I was asking Him, "Where are you? I cannot hear you. I cannot see you. I cannot sense your presence. I cannot feel you." Everything was falling apart, and I felt completely alone. And I want to ask you, have you ever experienced a moment like that in your life, or are you currently experiencing a moment like that in your life? If you have you ever thought that maybe the reason why that happened is because you made the decision to respond to the storm instead of waiting to hear from God? Some of you might ask, how is that possible? But I want you to think about that for a minute. I want you to think about what we just read in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 11 through 13. It said that God said that he was coming. God said that he was going to pass by. But before he passed by, there was a storm. Before he passed by, there was an earthquake. There was wind. There was fire. There was chaos. But he was not in it. He was coming right after it, but he was not in it. So maybe the reason why we're so discouraged in those storms is because we're expecting God to answer us in those storms, but God is coming after the storm. But then sometimes even after the storm, we don't hear him. But the reason why that happens is because we made the decision to respond to the storm instead of waiting patiently and responding to God when he comes. And I know that what I'm saying is easier said than done, right? And I understand that we don't normally intentionally block God. But sometimes I feel like the reason why we respond to the storm is because we mistake the storm as God's voice. We mistake the storm as God's voice because we believe that God's voice is the storm. And when you believe that God's voice is the storm, it's hard to believe that he will bring you out of something that you feel in your heart he caused. It's hard to believe that God will love you so much to bring you out of a situation that you believe he caused to harm you, that you believe he caused to bring you pain, that you believe he caused because he wanted to see you suffer. It is hard to trust God to bring you above what you believe he caused to destroy you, what you believe he caused to hurt you. Us mistaking God as the storm affects our relationship with him. Think about it for a minute. When you are going through a hardship, when you are experiencing a storm, what do you most likely do? You stop seeking God. You stop praying. You stop reading your Bible. You stop pursuing him. You stop going to church. You stop fasting. You stop speaking in tongues. Why do you stop doing the things that you used to do? It is because you feel like, what is the point? Why do you feel like, what is the point? It is because you no longer believe that God has the power to bring you out of this circumstance. But take a moment and think about why that is. Why do you believe that God no longer has the power to do this thing for you? It is because you believe that he brought it to you. It is because you believe that this situation is him speaking to you. You mistaking hardships as God's voice is going to affect your relationship with him. It's going to affect you pursuing him. It's going to affect you seeking him. And guess what? If you stop seeking him, if you stop pursuing him, then when he actually does come and try to speak to you, you will no longer be able to hear him. And that's detrimental, because even in the story with Elijah, God's voice and God's instructions did not come from the chaos. It came after. And I know that some of you are going to hear this and you are going to question, like, well, if God's voice is not in the chaos, then why does God allow the chaos? Why did God allow the storm to pass by? The reason why is because chaos, storms, and hardships build character. God's main intention is to grow you. God's main intention is to transform you. And how can he grow you without allowing you to go through things? You have to fail. You have to mess up. You have to experience uncomfortability in order to be transformed inside. I want to give you an example about me personally to make this more real to you. I think I said this before, but I have experienced what it's like to be financially successful, and I have experienced what it's like to be completely broke. I mean, down to $1 in your account, down to being afraid to check your bank account because you don't want to see how much money you actually have in there. I experienced both. I have experienced going from being financially successful to being downright broke. In my experience, when I was financially successful, I needed a lot to grow. Like I needed a lot of financial literacy. I needed a lot that I needed to understand. There was a lot of things that I needed to grow. However, because I was successful, because I was comfortable, because I was at peace, I did not feel the need to grow. It wasn't until everything turned upside down. It wasn't until I went through that season where I was broke. It wasn't until I went through that season where I was scared to open my bank account because I didn't want to see how much money I had in there. That is the season where I finally felt like you need to learn financial literacy. That is the season where I finally started reading books. I finally started attending financial classes. I finally started learning financial habits and financial traits. It was when I failed. It was when I got to a place of being uncomfortable. Because when you are comfortable, you don't feel the need to keep going. You don't feel the need to change. You feel like clearly what I'm doing is working, right? What's the need to change it? But when things aren't working, that is what motivates you to go and seek and find something that will. And God understands that about us. You know, going through that season, if you were to ask me so many years ago, like if you were to ask me, how do you feel about it? I would have said, I don't get it. I don't understand why God would do that to me. I don't understand why God would allow that for me. But me today, and understanding everything that I learned, all of the wisdom that I've gained from going through that season, I felt like that season was necessary. As hurtful as it was, as painful as it was, as depressing as it was, that season was necessary. That storm was necessary. So when we ask, why does God allow this to happen? Because maybe he wants us to grow. Maybe he sees something in us that we don't see in ourselves. Going back to that story, at the time I was financially successful, but I was praying to God for more. There was more that I wanted him to do with me financially. And instead of him doing for me financially, he took me through that financial hardship. And at the time I was so angry. I said, God, this is the complete opposite of my prayer. Like literally, I did not pray to be broke. I prayed to be successful. I prayed to be financially okay. And you took me from being a little successful at a high peak in my life to being all the way low. And I was irritated. I was angry. But looking back on that season, I realized if God would have just answered my prayer, I would have fumbled my blessing, and I would have fumbled the money that he sent me the same way that I was fumbling the little bit of money that he already gave me. That season was necessary for me to be able to sustain in the place that I was praying for him to take me. So I feel like sometimes we really have to shift our perspective on things. Stop asking God why he allowed a season to pass by. Stop asking God why he allowed a storm to pass by, because nothing that God allows is for our destruction. Everything that God allows is for our benefit. So even though his voice may not have been in the storm, there are still things that you can take away from the storm that's going to help you when he does speak to you. That's going to help you when he does bring that thing to you. Don't respond to the storm. Take advantage of the storm. That's a better way, and that's a better perspective to have. Instead of responding to the storm, instead of giving emotions to the storm, take advantage of the storm. Because I'm going to be honest, in my financial downfall, I could have laid down and died. I felt like laying down and dying. I felt like what I was doing was laying down and dying. But a lot of people would not have taken advantage of that season like I did. How I had the revelation, you really need to learn financial literacy. And I took a step and I started educating myself. I started learning financial habits. I started learning wisdom around finances. And then I started applying that with the little bit of money that I had. I didn't need hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank to apply those principles. I could apply those principles with a couple of cents that I had. Take advantage of the season and understand that if you do that and you continue pressing into God, eventually you are going to hear his voice, because God's voice is not the storm. But I want to go back to the story of Elijah for just a minute. Remember, a wind came and God was not in it. An earthquake came, but God was not in it. A fire came, but God was not in it. And then a gentle whisper came, and God was in it. We understand that, but we also need to understand that when the wind came, when the earthquake came, when the fire came, Elijah did not go out and stand on top of the mountain, nor did he respond. Elijah only responded when he heard the gentle whisper. When I think about why that is, I realize it is because Elijah recognized God's voice. Elijah knew God. Elijah knew how God spoke. Elijah knew the ways that God spoke. Elijah knew the ways that God operated. So he didn't make the mistake of mistaking the wind, fire, or earthquake as God. He knew that God's voice was gentle. He knew that God's voice was not the chaos. He knew that God's voice was not the storm. The reason why we mistake God's voice as the storm is because we do not know how to discern how God speaks. We do not know how to discern how God operates. And this is why I keep going back to the story, because I want you to pay attention to how God speaks. I want you to understand that God's voice will never be the noise. So many stories in the Bible, God's voice was not the noise. God spoke to Elijah in a small whisper. God spoke to Joseph in his dreams. God always speaks to people in a peaceful way. God's voice is never loud and over the top. God's voice is always gentle. And I started to question, why is his voice always gentle? I feel like it is because you have to be very intentional to hear a whisper. You have to be very intentional to hear somebody whispering to you. If you were in a crowd of people, let's say you were at an airport, like there was a lot of people. There's so many people talking. There's phones going off. There's the suitcases rolling on the floor. There's dogs barking. There's speakers, like people go talking over the speaker. And there was one person with you, let's say it's your child, and they're whispering. You really have to lean in to drown out all of the noise around you and hear your child whispering. The reason why God talks to us in a whisper, the reason why God talks to us in small, gentle ways is because he wants us to be intentional about hearing him. So when you are surrounded by chaos, when you are surrounded by noise, he wants you to intentionally lean into him to drown out the noise. Forget my storm. Forget my problem. Forget what's going on. I'm about to go run to God and get as close to him as possible to be able to drown out the noise and hear his voice. Pay attention in the story of Elijah. The wind passed, the earthquake passed, the fire passed. Elijah didn't run to it, because if Elijah would have ran to it, the noise of the storm would have gotten louder. So what he did was he stayed far back in the cave and he allowed that to pass. But then when he started to hear the whisper, when he started to hear the voice of God, he ran towards that. Because if he would have stayed in the back of the cave when God was speaking, he wouldn't have been able to hear what God was saying. But he ran towards what God was saying, and then he ran away from what the storm was saying. Everything that God does is intentional. And my question for you, and this is even a question that I have to ask myself, why do we run to the noise and away from God instead of running to God and away from the noise? If you have been struggling to hear from God, I want you to ask yourself, where has your attention been? Has your attention been on God, or has it been on the storm? Have you been responding to God, or have you been responding to the storm? The biggest takeaway from this episode is that what you respond to matters. Do not accidentally mistake God's voice as the storm. God's voice will never be the noise. It will never be the storm. It will always be a calm, gentle whisper that you have to intentionally lean into instead of leaning into the storm. And so my action step for you this week is every day this week, every single day, from the day that you listen to this episode to the next 7 days, every single day, take 5 to 10 minutes to sit in complete stillness. While you're sitting, ask God to speak to you. Then write down anything, any small nudges, any small thoughts, or any moments of peace that you experience while either sitting there or while going throughout the day. And then at the end of the week, I want you to reflect. What did God say to you? How did God speak to you? How did God go about speaking to you? And then start expecting that. I don't even care if you are currently going through a storm. If you are currently going through a storm, this is the perfect time for you to lean into God. Run into the direction of God and stop running into the direction of the storm. Stop allowing the fact that the storm is here and that the storm is so loud to stop you from pursuing God. Because if it is, all that is doing is showing you that you are too close to the storm, that you are drowning out God, when you should be so close to God that you are drowning out the storm. So don't let the fact that you are going through something stop you from doing this. Anybody can do this. And I want each and every one of you to do this week. But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. And also, share this episode with anybody who you feel has been going through something. They have been struggling to hear God. Share this with them. And also leave a comment or a DM telling me your biggest takeaways from this episode and how this has helped you. But that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.